Have you ever wondered what Bloodborne might look like running at 4K 60 frames per second? It's a concept that always seemed impossible. That is, until today. This is Bloodborne, running at 4K 60 frames per second. It is glorious, but is it possible? The answer to this question is not exactly straightforward. You see, what you are seeing here is Bloodborne running on PlayStation 5 at 60 frames per second, but the image quality has been boosted thanks to artificial intelligence. So, how was this done? Well, to discuss that, I've brought along my good friend and colleague, Richard Ledbetter.
Hey John, so this is it. This is the dream made real. I think, wow, where do we begin here? There's so many issues here. So first of all, if you run Bloodborne on PlayStation 5, you effectively get a presentation that isn't that much better than running it on a base PlayStation 4. The game never received a Pro upgrade. It was never unlocked to run at higher frame rates than 30 frames per second. The 30 frames per second in itself is compromised owing to inconsistent frame pacing. But here, what we're showing here is kind of like, for the time being at least, the ultimate iteration of the game. So I think we need to talk about how we're able to show this, because there's kind of like three phases in making this footage possible, right?
Yes, that's right. So first of all, if you recall, we produced a video last year featuring Bloodborne running at 60 frames per second on PS4 Pro. I was joined by the man responsible for the patch that made this possible, Lance McDonald. He basically spent a long time sort of reverse engineering and working his way through the code and figuring out how to make the game work at 60 FPS, which was quite a challenge, and we covered it in that video. But the PS4 Pro was not capable of running this at a stable 1080p 60, and even 720p, which is something else he implemented, it wasn't perfect. So, but we wondered, and you could actually see in his patch notes, he said, if you want to play the game at 1080p 60, run 1080p.exe to apply that patch to the game. But he says, not recommended for 8th generation consoles, but it might be useful in the future. The future is now, though, Rich. And so obviously, we found a way to get this working on a PlayStation 5. But it's not just any PlayStation 5, because this is unsigned code.
Yeah, basically, Lance's patch only runs on, I'd guess, debug PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro hardware, or it would run on development hardware. Now, the PlayStation 5 retail unit, as things stand, is unhacked. So this is a development system. I mean, we don't have the system here ourselves, so we've just got the footage sent to us. And yeah, basically the game was repackaged and patched with Lance's patch, and then somehow it was made to run on PlayStation 5 development hardware. Now, I'm not quite sure how this was possible, but we know it's possible, first of all, simply by virtue of the performance, and secondly, due to the fact that you'll see the PlayStation 5 style of trophies pop in the top right there. So yeah, this is the real deal. This is Bloodborne running on PlayStation 5 with Lance's patch, but obviously, we took that one stage further because it's still 1080p at 60 frames per second.
That's right. So we will benchmark this in a moment. But for now, we want to talk about AI upscaling. Obviously, this is becoming a hot new thing in recent years. NVIDIA has employed AI in its DLSS technique. But offline AI rendering is quite possible, and there are a multitude of techniques available for doing this. But upscaling video, it's kind of a tricky thing because, using AI to upscale a video game versus, say, a filmed piece of footage, it's a very different thing in terms of the way it brings out details. So we had to play around with this, and I think, Richard, actually, you spent several days testing out various AI upscaling techniques.
Yeah, I used a tool called Topaz Video Enhance AI, and that ships with a whole range of different AI models for upscaling footage. It can go from anything from, I don't know, like 480p up to 8K. Obviously, here we're taking 1080p and upscaling it to 4K. Now, the issue is this game has got some rather distinctive visual quirks that the AI upscaling techniques would probably never have been exposed to. You know, they wouldn't have been trained around. We should probably talk about that first of all. Bloodborne is a very curious looking game in that there's a lot of problems with its anti-aliasing, which isn't that great, causes a lot of shimmer. Secondly, specular aliasing, the kind of shiny bits, they really pop and fizzle in motion. It doesn't look great. I mean, I think generally the game is starting to show its age. So yeah, the specular aliasing in particular causes real shimmer. An AI upscaling model would probably have never been exposed to that. And just generally, I think the look of the game, the aesthetic, it's of its time, and it kind of reminds me of those PS360 generation Unreal Engine 3 games, which were really heavy on detail, but also on aliasing. So we had to find an AI model that would kind of work for it. There are CG-based models that you'd think would be a good fit here. Problem being that they kind of simply serve to emphasize the shimmer, and it didn't look good.
So, yeah, and it's not just the shimmer, it's also they have the chromatic aberration.
Yeah.
Which is strongly used throughout the game. So when you combine the specular shimmering and the poor anti-aliasing with the chromatic aberration, you get a very noisy image. And most of the techniques you tried didn't really clean that up, except for one of them.
Yeah, this technique that you're seeing here, it does actually do a pretty reasonable job of diminishing the specular aliasing. Now, in turn, you could possibly suggest that you are losing detail. But you'll see elsewhere within the presentation that, things just look like native 4K, that the UI is basically a perfect 4K, which I think we're both blown away by. And, when you look at specific detail, like on a main character, there's areas there where it resolves to proper native 4K. So we decided to take that particular model, make some changes to the way it was sharpening and deblocking and reducing noise for best results. And then the process of upscaling, about 40 minutes of raw capture began. And I'm actually still, while we record this, producing the last clip. And it's currently processing away at 0.59 frames, no, not frames per second, seconds per frame. So half a second, basically, to produce one frame. And there are 60 frames per second here. So this is an offline technique. You wouldn't be able to run this in real time. So why are we doing it? Just because we kind of want to know what Bloodborne would look like at 4K resolution. And I think the AI model we've chosen here kind of gives a pretty good impression of what some kind of TAA implementation would look like.
Yeah, precisely. And, obviously it's not going to look perfect. Like it does look suitably 4K, I suppose, but there's definitely some drawbacks to this technique. The thing is, though, to really appreciate what we're trying to show here, you kind of have to watch this on a larger screen, I think. I mean, for myself, just looking at this video in the editing window, which is much, much smaller than how I would normally watch it, the differences become more difficult to spot. But when you actually watch it on a proper 4K TV or something, it is really cool to see, and it's pretty convincing there.
But there is this kind of joy where, after hours of processing, a few minutes of footage, you load it up in your media player, you run it at full speed, and wow,
yeah,
you just think I really want to play this.
Exactly. But I guess, so obviously visualizing this with AI upscaling is a huge part of the appeal here. It's neat to see. But if you were actually able to run this on PlayStation 5 with this patch, your experience would still be markedly improved. So this is where the benchmarking comes in, where we ran this raw footage through our frame rate analysis tool to see just how closely it actually sustains the 60 frames per second target at 1080p, which is, of course, the highest native resolution that the game itself can support.
Right.
Since, it is a base PS4 targeting game.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, based on these results, then, I would say it is nearly perfect.
Yeah, so what you're seeing here is basically, let's say in an ideal world, Bloodborne was patched, the frame rate limiter was removed, everything was fixed, but, they wouldn't be going in to remaster the game. This is the original code, simply with a frame rate cap removed and, tapping into the PlayStation 5's horsepower. A, this is what it would look like, and B, based on Lance's patch, this is how it would perform. And I didn't actually think this would be a foregone conclusion to be a locked 1080p 60, because as we saw during the review phase, there seems to be some titles on PlayStation 5 where they need to throttle back either the CPU or the GPU clock for compatibility reasons. So like with Assassin's Creed Unity, we couldn't get 900p 60 locked on there. But it seems that Bloodborne is by and large pretty much perfect.
Yeah, I mean, at worst, there's occasional small dips on the frame time graph that you'll catch, 33 millisecond pauses. And there's also at least one or two spots where there was an extended sort of pause in the action. But this is so rare and uncommon, and I actually had a difficult time finding these dips in the first place, as most of the footage was basically perfect.
And I think the other thing to point out is that we didn't actually capture the footage, so there is the small possibility that the capture device may be inserting some duplicate frames. Small possibility, but it is there.
That's also a true thing there, yes. But, overall, very, very smooth, and it really would be nice if this was accessible, which I think is perhaps where we should go next, because, is this possible? Could this actually be patched by Sony? Would it ever be patched? I mean, this is pure speculation on our part, but I think it's kind of an important part of the story.
Yeah, so where do we begin then? I mean, I guess the first question to ask is, why hasn't it been patched? I mean, if Lance McDonald can do it, why can't Sony do it? And I think there are some, logistical problems here. Basically, Lance's patch would also unlock the frame rate on the PlayStation 4 and the PS4 Pro versions of the game, which wouldn't be a good move, I don't think, based on what we've seen even on PS4 Pro. So, yeah, they would have to remount the entire project, update it with new code to kind of switch the enhancements made on and off depending on the platform. I guess it would, if it needs to specifically identify the PlayStation 5 as a target, the whole project needs to be updated to the latest cross-gen SDK. This is not easy.
That's one of the biggest problems with older games, actually, and this is something you don't often hear discussed, but simply opening, remounting, working with one of these old projects and then recompiling everything, that's not a simple task. And a lot of the libraries it might be using are outdated, and there's just so many things that can break when you do that. And it would require a lot of additional testing, and it would certainly not be a trivial exercise. And of course, Lance's patch, based on our experience with it, has been excellent. But that's not to say that there's still not something potentially broken in there. Maybe it's perfect. I don't know, but if you're going to put something out into the world like this officially, it needs to be very carefully tested to ensure that it doesn't break the game in any significant way. So this is a tall order, I think.
Yeah, and also I think, From Software would need to be brought back in to do the work, which is a contractual negotiation, which Sony probably wasn't thinking of back when they made the game way back when. So there's a lot of logistical and potentially legal issues surrounding an official update for the game. I guess the alternative would be something along the lines of what Microsoft does with FPS Boost, a system level upgrade. I'm not even sure whether that's possible, because Microsoft have basically got their DirectX layer that they have a lot of control over, whereas Sony's stuff seems to be a lot more low level. So I'm not sure that's entirely possible too.
Yeah, I'm really not certain that that could work on PlayStation, and they haven't put the time into figuring that out. It seems either. So maybe they have, but there is nothing like that currently. So I kind of feel like the only real path forward for those that would like to see an actual re-release of Bloodborne would have to be something like a proper remaster slash remake with someone like Bluepoint. They just did Demon Souls, and it was a phenomenal version of the game on PlayStation 5. And seeing that they have just worked on a From Software project, it kind of feels to me like this would be a natural fit for them.
Be a match made in heaven, wouldn't it? But again, it's something that couldn't be unleashed to the public overnight. This would be a proper full-on, like a development from a top-tier AAA studio.
Exactly, years of work.
So, I think from my perspective, Sony must surely be aware that there's money on the table there simply by getting an updated version of Bloodborne out there. More than enough money to justify the development effort required. The question is, who's going to do it, and how are they going to do it? And if you are going to go to all of those efforts, I mean, Sony would have been buoyed by the huge success of Demon Souls remake, and it just makes more sense, kind of, to actually push forward as a brand new project and relaunch the franchise that way. I think that would be the best way forward. But in the meantime, when I'm looking at this footage, I'm kind of looking on with wonder, really, because the game is transformed. It just looks terrific, and you see this and you want to play it.
Absolutely. Yeah, Bloodborne itself, just a phenomenal game. It was one of my favorites of the entire generation, last generation. Just the craft and the level design and the encounters, and the final boss, just unbelievable. One of the greatest moments. I absolutely love this game. And I'm clearly not alone. There's a lot of fondness for Bloodborne out there, and there's a reason why there's such a strong community built up around it. It's one of those things where I just can't see them completely forgetting about it.
Absolutely.
This has to come back at some point, I would think. It would just be, they're just leaving money on the table by not bringing this game back in some way. So I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Mm-hmm. But for now, hopefully you guys have enjoyed seeing what could be in this sort of unique video. And Rich, I think we might actually have something else in the future on this as well.
Yeah, we're going to be revamping our Patreon, offering a lot more new stuff to supporters of Digital Foundry. And, I've just spent the good part of 24 hours on an RTX 3090 upscaling this footage. I think we've got to do more with it. So, yeah. Let's revisit that when the time is right.
Definitely. But thank you for joining me, Rich.
Oh, it's just been awesome. I've just really enjoyed getting to grips with this technology, seeing what it's capable of, and seeing these results play out on screen. It's just hugely gratifying.
Yeah, I had fun playing around with AI stuff last year when I did that Final Fantasy VII video as well, trying to bring old assets back to a higher quality. It is engaging to mess with. If you guys have not played around with AI upscaling, you can have a lot of fun with it.
I think it's worth pointing out that the video upscale tool I'm using, Topaz Video Enhanced AI, does have a free trial. So if you fancy having a go with it, then go ahead. It's free.
Cool. And no, this episode is definitely not sponsored. It's just a cool program. So yeah, but anyway, thank you for watching.